Sweet transvestite from the land of Trumpsylvania. How do you do? I see you've met my faithful MAGA man. He's just a little brought down, cause when you knock, he thought you were the tax man. I don't get strung out by the way I tweet. Don't judge a man by the media hate. I'm not much of a politician by the light of day. By night, I'm one hell of a Twitter slave. I'm just a sweet transvestite from Trumpsylvania, huge and Trumpsexual.
All right, we should, cool. Welcome back to another edition of the Let's Grow Show. I'm Scott McLaughlin and I'm joined by Mark Civitella. I'm really excited about today's discussion because we're going to talk about what will actually people's perspective and also how to understand people's perspectives, probably most importantly. So for us personally, the US election is just kind of a neat stage from which to understand and to understand and to see how people are contemplating life and society. I want to say from the outset to anyone listening that, you know, there's a few things in life from my perspective and in my life that, you know, I'd probably sit in the same category. So things like, you know, pineapple on pizza, what the Kardashians are doing, whether you're a folder or a scruncher, or anything that mainstream media has to say fits entirely in the same bucket for me as politics. So I just want to say that you won't get a lot of political opinion from me here, but we are in fact just commentating on how effective this was. So I just want to check with one second. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. I suppose on the opposite of the Venn diagrams where there is a little bit of overlap, but on the other side of that, on the other part of that Venn diagram, where I suppose I made a living out of this sort of area, and I suppose most of mine has been on pretty well the other side of Trump. So I find Trump absolutely amazing. As what's been achieved and what's actually happened. And, you know, I suppose I'm also old enough to sort of take a much more sort of historical perspective. And you find when you get these seismic sort of adjustments, that there is this sort of ripple through. There are these sorts of rethinking, because it's not just, this is almost, Trump isn't just about, they've gone from the red team to the blue team. It's actually like, it's signaling more of the same isn't good enough. We're not going to put up with more of the same. So we now go, okay, we know what more of the same. Now what? You know, what is this future going to look like? So it's quite seismic in that sense. It's not just another election. No, I think that impact will reverberate. And you're absolutely right. You know, the words we use, how we talk, how we market products or services, and how we go about conducting ourselves. Will adjust in some respects. Of course, we're further away in Australia with a, you know, probably not as exposed to the market economy, you know, in personal lives as much as, say, the US, because we have more of a European welfare system sort of thing. So you sort of have that sort of, you have it sort of softened. There's a buffer, you know, to the impacts, which clearly has not happened in the US. And the rawness of the response and the magnitude of the victory. You know, there's always the qualifications in 2016. He won, but didn't win the popular vote. It wiped the floor. You know, I think it's Kamala Harris. There's always there's always some, you know, once you lose first job, find someone to blame. You know, so you know, we're now in this new era. And everyone, I suppose, that's the question. What is this era? And obviously, Australia and its ties with the US, and also its almost a trilateral trading relationship with China becomes this sort of thing, because the bogey man of the US has been China. It's China's fault, China virus, China. This causes the key trading partner of Australia. So this becomes, of course, the US is the key defense partner. So you're sort of in this very interesting position globally as well. And how it all will play out, I suppose, as well. We can talk about that today. We can with these things, whenever you're talking about the future, you really you are, to some degree, they're educated guesses. I always qualify that. No one actually can predict the future, so we'll have to wait for that future to unfurl. But we know we're in a different era now. We know that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just contemplating some technical stuff at the moment. But look, I think from a macro level, we could take a view of politics in society, Mark, to begin with, and just talk about what is the real role of politics in our thinking. Like, how important is it? I mean, I mentioned, before, it's not, for me, political contemplation is not up there. It's not something I think about a lot. I have maybe a cynical view of the influence of politics or politicians per se. I think from my perspective, I think, what does it tell us about the importance that we place on it and what we're really looking for from politicians? Because, it always astounds me that, in the Australian public, at least, we talk about, just how much an Australian Prime Minister makes and, how much money they make. And to me, that's been, a pretty astounding situation or scenario, because, it's like, if you really contemplate in Australia, the Prime Minister of Australia, as it's heralded, is late 500,000, let's call it 600,000, it's close enough, Australian dollars a year in salary. Yes, there's plenty of ancillary benefits and there's ongoing benefits, for a lifetime if you're a Prime Minister. However, if you're running the Macquarie Bank in Australia right now, you're on $25 million a year. And I always posit that if the role is so important, why are we paying them so little? Or rather, why aren't we attracting the best possible talent we could have to run the nation instead of running a banking institution? I don't know, Mark. I mean, I think that at its core tenet, we're not valuing the role, are we?
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's part of the difficulty, and there's a really complex question, because if you actually go back, what's the paradigm for this? Is ancient Athens. This is, so of course, half our audience, I'm very sorry, women didn't get the vote. Also, if you weren't an Athenian citizen, so anyone who isn't, you don't get a vote either. But for those that did, had sortition. You draw ballots, and okay, guess what, Scott? You're now one of the legislators. Off you go.
Yes.
You can't make these rules, right? I'm not. I didn't. Yeah. My thing didn't come out of the hat, And so that way, the whole idea was democracy by the citizens for the citizens, and so on. That can probably work in a smallish city state or even a larger city state. But when you get to nation states and so on, and the way they were constructed, effectively, after the First and Second World War, really the construction of what we would sort of see as the nation state. And giving them names and drawing lines on a map and saying that's the state and all the rest. And of course, there's endless disputes over those territories, as we're all aware. But that actually had something to it, and obviously that didn't survive because that you had the Roman Empire. Well, actually, there's a totally different system for that, and so on. And so there's no actual real thing that where someone says this model and this way of applying that model. Obviously, democracies in this case that they work in this particular way. And you got to go back up until to the end of the Second World War. There was only about a dozen democracies in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There just weren't. It's a new thing. So maybe we haven't got it right yet. So now we have a whole lot of democracies, and this is the model. We're going to have a democracy with a free market and all that stuff. That became the model. Mm-hmm. And I suppose what's happening now is that sort of model is crumbling. And I suppose, you know, how much you pay the elected representative and so on. And there are like some states in the United States, for example, where, you know, you run for election, you go, you make all the laws, then you go back to your job working the newsagent or the butcher.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. You made, yeah, you passed the laws. That's it. Then go back and do your job. It's
Yeah.
not a full-time thing, because there's just you just make. Then the bureaucracy runs it. Yeah, they implement the decisions you've made. So
Yes.
there are very many different models, and I suppose there's always that crazy thing about, you know, who's in it for the money, because ultimately these things are public services. A bit like, you know, the Athenian was more like jury duty. You know, everyone tried to find a way of getting out of it the minute they're picked. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're the things. So I don't know whether that paradigm, but I think where I think I would differ with you, Scott, I don't pay attention to, is sometimes they're epochal, you know. And if you go back to what Trump is really doing, is he's turning the sort of paradigm that came out through, if you like, probably the 80s and Reaganomics, if you like. So it's ironically both from the same political party, but that he would never. That's where the similarity ends. Is it was about, you know, free trade. You don't go to war with a trading partner. Why would
That's
you?
right.
You know, so
Yes,
the
that's
whole
right.
idea of free trade, you had open borders, you had globalization, that in fact the workers are better off because they could buy cheaper goods from countries that do, and basically you fast forward 45 years or so, the model broke. The election of Trump says that model, but so for most of people's lives has been governed, and if you like, that system sort of governs what you talk internationally, you know. So a brand, for example, you know, if you're a global brand, you may, you know, donate part of your money to the environment. That's global. To gender identity support or something, that's global, if you like, you know, or at least Western global. Um, Certainly not Middle East, certainly Africa. Yeah, it may not translate, but, you know, certainly for your major markets, that would be seen as somewhat as a global. What the focus now very much is, if you think of that as well, what are you doing for that small town that's been smashed apart by globalization, and those families there that are struggling, that have served their country and raising a family that get no support, right? Why isn't that the hero? Why isn't that the beneficiary of this brand? Because a global brand can't connect to that. You know, they're distant to that. Then probably the headquarters is probably in another country. You know, how do you localize? So, and Trump won by that localization component. So when you think of
Yes.
this, whereas it's the exact opposite of, if you like, Reagan was about Star Wars. We had the enemy. The enemy was the Soviet Union. Blah blah blah. We won that, you know, and now we're in this other paradigm where, you know, if you're a brand, what, you know, who is your beneficiary? What is
Yes.
if you're a purpose-driven brand, what's your purpose? Is it to throw more money at these green things that Trump's attacking, or these sorts of gender identity? You know, is this a backlash? Yeah, these are now the questions for
Yes.
brands and for the language we use. So, you know, that's where we are, and that's where I think, you know, where I would say the politics really does connect, really does, you know, frame things when you get that epochal moment. I think we've probably had, you know, a fairly consistent, you know, four decades, 4 to 5, and now I think we're seeing something quite different. And the fact that I think that after a 4-year returning to the normal under Biden, people said, no, we can't do the normal in that. We can't not doing that anymore. We've got to have something different. And that's why
Because I mean, for many of us in different countries, it's remarkable that somebody who has been, you know, tried in the courts and all that sort of stuff is, to be honest, even had the gall to stand up and put himself forward as a candidate. But, you know, in the end, what does America really want from this, and what do we see that the world really wants in their leadership and political leadership? And I think America's probably echoing the sentiment of the world, which is, can we, can we actually have someone who will stand up and stand for something? That those of, and that something being something that is important to most of us. And I think that was a really defining thing too. I mean, in recent times, I've had plenty of cause to reflect on, in a marketing context, people seem to, as they do in the political context, get caught in the thick of thin things and talk about things that are really superfluous to a customer, to a voter, that really don't mean much to them on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like Trump cut through all that. And we do have lots of narrative out there at the moment that we have to, as communicators, understand doesn't grab the interest, attention, and passion of the majority. In fact, quite the opposite. It tends to allure the minority. So if we start talking about the importance of pronoun application, most people in the population understand that there's a new way of behaving that is more acceptable in terms of, I guess, welcoming gender pronoun application, all that sort of stuff, at least overtly or externally. But internally, for most people, it's like, well, okay, whatever. Have sex with a goat, I don't care. And I think that Trump really cut through that, where I see in marketing, it just astounds me. I was commenting to somebody the other day that one of the biggest trends we've had in Western society over the last 50 years is the cataclysmic rise of divorce. So why would a marketer give a shit about divorce? Well, in Australia, it's just short of 50% divorce rate. So if you think about that, what happens when you divorce? Well, you actually have a shift in pattern of behavior. You actually have a shift in consumer behavior. Now, that could be one of opportunity or despair, and I do believe it goes one or two ways for people post-divorce or post-separation. But what changes is the way you act and behave as a consumer. What changes is your locus of control over life. What changes is your behavior. And in the 31 years I've been around brands and lots of stuff, I have never heard marketers talk about divorces from a consumer marketing point of view. And in the same vein, when we talk about things like gender pronouns and LGBTQI and the environment and all that sort of stuff, what is the greater populace concerned with? What are they truly concerned with? Is it that stuff that gets the lion's share of the voice? Or is it the fact that the vast majority of population are mostly silent about those things because they offer either no opinion or interest? I mean, I think that, and that isn't that what we're seeing out of this election, Mark?
Oh yeah, I think we're seeing, and I think we also saw it in 2016 when Trump won. Then you actually saw for the first, the tradition in politics. You go in, you suck up to the media, they say some nice things, you give them as much time as you can, they write nice things about you, and you go in hopefully on even footing against your opponent into an election context. That's sort of like the old school strategy. 2016, yeah, sure. I was just falling off my chair and I became mesmerized by this. Trump would fly into some, airport in the middle of nowhere sort of thing. He was so busy. He'd fly on his Trump jet, whatever, and there was basically sectioned off. There was a rope. His supporters would all come out. He didn't even bother leaving the runway. Like they all came basically to the run. He didn't even bother sort of doing a tour. He just sort of dropped dead, said hello, and head up. You get in there, and of course the media's corralled off into one section. He gets in, berates the media, tells them they're liars, they're corrupt, they lie to you, don't trust them, and berates the media. His supporters turn around and scream abuse at the media. Then he gets on the plane, flies off to the next town to repeat this message. This is the total opposite of what the orthodoxy is, and it worked. And then of course. And his other one, of course, and so you have to go to the 28 top news media outlets in the US in 2016 before you found one who said, "Yeah, he might win."
That's right. That's right.
He was sort of proven. They all said he would lose. He won, and all the polls said he would lose. He won. So all the polls, of course, we find out through the polls or through the media, right? So the polling's lying, the media's lying, and you put the two together. Can you trust any of them? So. And likewise, the narrative now is, the polls got it wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And so you put these two together. So how can a poll be wrong? Well, there's a whole show on that, but I basically have a PhD on polling, Scott, so we won't cut.
Yes,
Derek.
yes, I understand. Mark did actually run a polling company, so
we'll move on.
there is that. Yeah,
there is that. But
he's responsible for dragging me into this bloody world of disinterest.
Actually,
I mean, effectively, I could be, I could be doing other things, but instead, I'm talking about pineapples on pizza and Kardashians with Mark. But
no. But you actually look at that, and so you're exactly right. So the things that are meant to represent us and magnify our points of view in the public sphere, if you like, represented not you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so your share of voice, if you like, your representation through the formal mechanisms in a democracy wasn't there, and all of a sudden, Trump managed to do that. But he also did it in the way where he was whacking down the media on the way through, and people got off on it. They loved it. So it's quite extraordinary. He just saw that there were, and if you actually look at it, if you do a sort of if you did some old-fashioned, highest level of education attained and all the rest, you're going to find a real split. The sort of people that reading the Wall Street Journal and the sort of people that are voting for Trump and all the rest, they're different people. They live in different parts, and if you go to there's a high anti-Trump, in those areas, and it almost correlates on education level and so on, and along other lines. And so you actually see the sorts of things that dominate a prosperous middle class sort of environment aren't the things that dominate, country towns, both in Australia and
United
States. So if you walk into a country town and you went into a pub or something or other, they wouldn't be having the same conversations as you would in one of the capital cities here in Australia, for example. And I think being able to actually say that, I will give you a voice, but to actually then, and here I suppose, there's probably this other thing, probably the worst book I've ever read on politics, but probably the best book in a way on politics was written in the 1930s by a Nazi jurist in Germany. As a supporter of.
Excellent example.
Excellent example. You said
yeah.
It is the obligation of every good government to have an enemy. You need an enemy. How are you going to pull people together unless they don't know what they've got in common, but they know what they're against? And you've got to pull them together. And of course, there was the horrible, the Jewish, it was Jews and gays and gypsies and whatever were put to death in the millions as a result of this sort of thinking. But that in a way was what and so if you look in the US, when the US has an enemy and has troops abroad, domestic terrorism falls off. The minute you don't have a foreign enemy, domestic terrorism goes up. It's quite an extraordinary correlation. So, and it sort of proves that overall point that we probably know more what pulls us together is by defining what we're not. So, attacking foreigners, they're eating the dogs and all this stuff. They're not like, there's stuff like like you're trying not to laugh when you hear it.
Of course.
It says what they're really saying is they're not like us. That's what the message is. You don't. And I think Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, made one of the nicest lines about Trump. He said, when you're thinking of Trump, don't listen to what he says, listen to what he means.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so it's not about eating dogs, it's about they're not like us.
That's right.
That's the message, but the words are they're eating dogs. And what happens? The Democrats get it and they repeat the message over and over again. Like, gee, you might want to talk about
and again, that's the point about what is the common ground, what is the common belief, not what is acceptable in society in particularly amidst the woke, who I believe are increasingly asleep. But in the end, the great populace is not on board. In the end, the great populace is about self-interest and what about me and my kids and what's going on, right? You keep talking about all these fractals of society. And it reminds me very much of, oh God, too many years ago, a couple of decades, in fact, I had a young kid come to me who was in my team in a research company, and with this startling insight for a telecommunications company, was basically saying that gay men over-indexed crazily on the iPhone, which then at that point was a new thing. And I remember saying to him, because I understand it, the gay male population in Australia is 3.5 percentage points of the population. And I would believe that this person we're presenting to, Australia's largest telco, probably cared about the other 96.5% of people as well. But we play the edges to talk about difference, and my social conscience isn't on board, and I'll just own that. So if you want to be called by, a pronoun, or you want to be referred to, or you want to use that, that's fine. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that, right? What I have a problem with is constructs that we continue to throw into society that are about our division. What the campaign has fed on is the reluctance of people to get on the bus. It has fed on, you keep talking about immigrants and all these people coming to the country. You keep talking about pronouns and transgender and, all this sort of stuff. That's not me. And his campaign that literally said, Carmela talks about them, they, I'm here for you, was genius.
Yeah,
Not because people don't believe in people's, human right to make choice. It's just that for people, most people are going, well, that's great, but what about me?
Yeah,
because that ain't me.
And I think that's he was basically able to leverage that you were left behind because all these things, the elites, which is the media and polling and all that, and Washington and all these bureaucrats, they're all going to get sliced apart with the new committees. That they have left you behind. They have forgotten you don't exist. And I think it was that thing, where, really Biden didn't help with the garbage comment and Hillary didn't help with the deplorables comment. I mean, it's almost like they've never met them. They don't hang around Washington, and if you've been to Washington, it's a different sort of world. They don't hang around New York, Washington, Los Angeles, to a degree, it's a different sort of thing. And likewise here, you go into country towns, they're different to the cities. The people are different. They think differently. They apply a different sort of framework and moralities as well. So you find that it's exactly right that he's managed somehow. And what we're now finding is this group were the majority in that election. There was no irregularity, So that's the slap in the face. It wasn't just an anomaly. It was a one-off. No. So it's actually now to go, something has fundamentally not worked for this. Because if you take your point, I agree with you. When the advantage of getting older, there aren't many. The women, when I was a kid, you're either a miss or a missus. You were a miss till you got married, then you were called Mrs. That was literally the pronouns for women, like all women. Right? And Ms. came in the feminist sort of, and that was deemed a feminist thing, Ms. And there's nothing more, it says, look, I shouldn't be defined by whether I'm married or not. And that's exactly right. Absolutely right. Well, why should you be defined? And now that's just common, that's not a big deal, So I think this sort of sense, but it's when you're struggling and your whole town is struggling, it's that is just not a first tier concern when you're worried about, will anyone in this family ever get a proper job? Where are the proper jobs? Whatever happened to that career job in manufacturing? You started as an apprentice, and 30 years later you finished, and you were the supervisor of a department, and your salary had grown. Those jobs went, and that's the thing. And there's been and it's very gendered around this as well, because most often women didn't have those opportunities in that historical progression in the economy. Men did. And that actually gave them, you know, some degree of status and all the rest, and a hierarchy, and it anchored them. And so, you know, and you could get a home loan, and you could do all these other things, and you'd get your kid a job as an apprentice, and these sorts of things were, you know, self-fulfilling benefits, you know, in many respects. Yes, jobs may not have been them, but we've sort of now gone to, you know, you've got to go to uni, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and it just doesn't suit some people. And what really happens in a country town, if all the kids go to uni, all the unis that you really want to be in are in the capital cities, and they don't come back. So all the smart people leave, if you like. All the young people leave. Probably not the smart people, just the young people.
A lot of book smart people.
Yeah, I may have I think I misspoke, I think. And so what happens when all the young people leave? All the energy, dynamism, creativity, entrepreneurship, all that things which often go with that goes. You know, so you get these dead towns because they're almost designed to be dead, because of the policy setting, the politics of it, almost ensure that it's going to struggle. And I would say for anyone, if you ever really want to see an example, there's one of those free-to-air stations, you know, you stumble across it from time to time and go, what on earth? And they're all called, they're all set in like American towns that have had better days. Right?
Yes.
So it's not about building the biggest skyscraper or the biggest. It's called. They're all called things like. It's basically about the theme would be regenerating our town. We take a house. This person can't really afford it, and we go and we renovate it, and we do this, and we bring it back, and we actually add on this because their kid hasn't, and they've never been able to afford, and they've made a contribution to the town, and they should be respected. And so it's basically about that community looking after itself. Right? It's restoring, regenerating, it's, you know, fixer-upper, you know, it's all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And it's, geez, there's this bloody incredible theme. Yeah, in America, it doesn't happen in Australia as much, but certainly in the US. And what's absent? Government, grant schemes, bureaucratic support, welfare systems. It's just people in this town with skills and labor and sweat and muscle work, helping each other out. And wholly absent is government.
Yes.
Wholly absent. Whereas in Australia, the first thing you do if you want to generate a town is you fill out the grant application. You know? We have a welfare, we have money for this, you know. As long as we keep minerals, we have money for this. So we have a different paradigm. But you're looking at this and you go, well, I'm looking at it, that's the politics. There's a politics in this show, which is there's no one else here to help us. We will rely on each other. We will repurpose things. It's not about recycling. It's about, you know, we will do it affordably, efficiently. We will do it through compassion and love. We will celebrate each other as a community. I mean, this is really nice.
But to me, that's such a critical point. It is such a critical point.
So what is their language? What is their language? How do they market that? These are popular, you know, how do they market that? What's the language they use? The language they use, the language I would be using selling the iPhone.
And look, you know, at the risk of being controversial, and anyone listening from the US, and there should be quite a lot of you based on registrations, please know that, you know, you are criticised for being an insular nation. You are, you know, criticised for this incredible self-belief that to other countries appears in the absence of any knowledge outside of the US. That is a constant criticism of the US. However, for those of us outside of the US, let's come to appreciate some of the nuance and spectacular value in this. Right? So I hear things like, and it doesn't mean anything to me, but I believe it means something to an American. Let's make America great again, right? And I'm thinking, well, when was the first time? Was it Bruce Springsteen? That's my reference. Oh, what's going on, right? So, you know, but to America, there is an innate belief in its superiority, in it being a global leader, in it having the smartest, quickest, and in many cases they are. Fine examples. Some of the biggest, in fact, almost all the biggest businesses in the world come out of the US, right? There's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be said for the capacity of not only self-belief, but having a go and making shit work, right? The Americans are very, very good at this. But a lot of that comes from not only the belief, but the other inherent advantage in American culture, in my view, is, to your point about working together, is there's a collegiate mentality. Again, for Americans, if you go to university here, you go and you get a degree. You don't go to belong to anything.
Yeah.
You go to get the piece of paper, right? And you might go to this school instead of this school because you might be a better chance, if you're a lawyer, per se, of getting into, an established firm or a firm with a great reputation if you happen to go to this particular university, right? It might give you an advantage, right? But that's purely an academic thread. There's no culture. There's no I'm a Yale guy. We don't have that. And I believe that it's an actual asset for America to have that, because I would say that one of the great things that we are missing in Australia is that collegiate view. So when Americans hit the workforce, they become company people. We don't understand that in Australia. We're like, what? What do you mean? I don't belong to anything. Right?
Yeah.
You want my skills, you give me money, I'll give you effort, right? It's a transaction. Yeah. So we have some of the worst employee retention rates in the world in Australia. Right? Because we don't have a collegiate view of belonging to shit. But in America, that's an inbuilt mechanism of the way society is built. And people always proudly declare that they went to this university and that university, and I'm a Harvard guy, or I'm a Yale guy, or I'm a UCLA guy, or whatever the hell it is, right? And that's important to Americans. So belonging is where I'm getting to. Belonging is important to Americans. And again, I believe that is an asset for American society. I believe it's been tantamount to their success as an economy. So even though the rest of us sit around cynically in the world and going, look at those guys, they're so full of themselves, they don't really understand it actually works. And Trump has tapped into that ether, that understanding, and gone, we are a great country. Yeah. Hell yes, we are.
Well,
and they're on it.
Yep. In a funny way, like someone tries to assassinate him, and he gets up, and what's the first thing you do? The first thing I'd do is run, or help, or so, fight, and it's like, wow, fighting who? I'm watching. I was mesmerized. Oh my God, what happened? Who are we fighting again? And in a strange way, despite it being Obama's key message, was Trump sold hope.
Absolutely.
And that's why, got Elon Musk, in a funny way, Elon Musk, he sold American exceptionalism. I mean, Elon Musk is an exceptional individual,
Absolutely.
Recyclable rockets, mate. It was my idea, wasn't it? No, hang on. It wasn't. No, it was someone else's. That's right. Yeah. No, that was yours, was it? No. This is, it was exceptional sort of people. Are they the right people? Whatever. That's a different question. But that was American exceptionalism on show, and that hope we are going to make things, make America great. Now, I might add, Ronald Reagan used the phrase, "We're going to make America great again." Bill Clinton used the phrase "Make America Great Again." This is, So they do have a sense, and it really was that
been done before.
Second
World War. It's been done before.
It has been. All good things have been done before. But that post-war growth in the US was one of the most remarkable events in economic, history. In history, it's extraordinary, and that sort of reach it had, and and of course, you also had, if you like, you got to remember back in those days, in the 80s or something. I think it might have been the 80s. It was about 4/10 of the world's population lived in a country that would have defined itself as socialist or communist. 4/10 of the world population. So there was a thing. There was an enemy. So so there was a natural sort of, and I think
it's so true that that it's moved on, right?
And things have moved on, but I think that in that strange way, despite he sold hope in it's sort of I'm not trying to work out how it worked. It was almost the negative aspect of hope. It's hope because we'll beat them. It's hope because we will do something to them to stop them. And the hope is and I just think that that's the thing that I think people have found very difficult to digest is there was this sort of, despite all the vaudevillian stuff that he sort of brings to this, which is just this I've never seen. I don't think it'll catch on here, but
no, but you're
but
absolutely right.
It's
And
theatre, he's just this amazing playing of the systems, and a mastery of it, while almost being defined as a buffoon. He clearly wasn't.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that people need to take away from this, from a communications point of view, is that, and it was a great TikTok. If I find it, I'll put it in the comments of this event. There's a great TikTok from an American woman who happens to be of African persuasion, I think is the way we would prefer to say it. And she mentioned that, the thing that Trump accomplished in the campaign was to give people hope, even if hope was improbable. And in other words, she was suggesting that he got people to believe in something, not because it was possible, because they wanted it. And so this is an election that's been won on emotion. It has been won on how I want to feel. It's been won on how I feel about this, and we should restore ourselves to a level of pride that we once had, so that we can again dominate, right? So that is, he absolutely tapped into that. And, she was right in her sort of, analysis of that, geez, I'd hate to do that in Australia, right? Because, Mark and I were having a conversation yesterday, and Mark raised a really good point that I'm going to steal. But he was saying that
electric cars, Scott, so that's
yeah. There's the majority, the popular majority about, what to say and do, and what's acceptable and what isn't. And so it isn't societally acceptable to criticize transgender. It isn't societally acceptable to criticize pronouns or LGBTQI. That's not acceptable. Now, that's got nothing to do. So overt expression has nothing to do with belief, right? So I will say this thing because it's safe, but I happen to believe something else, or I happen to think about something else. So Mark was talking about how Musk is going to come in and obliterate 30% of the US government workforce. Now, and Mark was asserting yesterday, and I agree that the average American would probably overtly or externally say, "Oh, gee, that's going to," but internally they might be saying, "Oh, geez, about time. There's so much wasteful bloody money getting going. Like what a waste, right?" But you wouldn't say that. But you'd vote for it.
Yeah, I think they did. I think there was that sense that if we keep we keep growing these things, we keep giving money to we keep doing, but nothing gets better for many people, right? It doesn't get better for some. It does not.
That's right.
And I think they're the ones that have now hit the majority. That's the thing about democracy. That's the majority. You don't have to be right. You just have to have 50% plus one. That's sort of that's sort of the people think there's a contest of right or a contest of the cleverest. No, it's just 50% plus one. That's what it is, and that's the system. And you're absolutely right that and that's why we saw the polls. People wouldn't. It wasn't socially polite to express certain things, and you see it here in Australia all the time.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. I mean, I think in Australia, for those non-Australians on the call, which is the vast majority of you, we have a profound number of our population working in government roles. For a society of 26 million people, the fact that we have 3 layers of government to govern a population smaller than many cities is unbelievable to me personally, let alone the fact that the average Australian, I'll put forward, is that the average Australian would have an inherent belief that there may be waste in the system. That maybe bureaucracy is not as efficient as we might like. Maybe taxpayer money, which is an inordinate proportion of our income in Australia, is being wasted, Mark. And that You know, if we were to have the same testimony from somebody here that they would obliterate 30% of our government employees, perhaps the average Australian would say, "Is that all?" Maybe not out loud, but
I think up until the point where people stopped buying the coal and uranium and iron ore, I think when the money dries up and the lucky comes out of the lucky country, I think how much money do we spend on that again? It's the only country where, you know, it's people are sort of baffled at just how much money can get swirled around on government projects, and just sort of add a zero and off we go. Oh well, don't worry, we'll just sort of, you know, crank the machine that, you know, that sells coal. You know, that'll be good.
Just go a bit deeper. There's more lucky in there.
We need to fund renewables. We better sell more coal. You know, it's the Australian idiom. You know. But
get an electric car because it's better for the planet, and we'll give you a rebate whilst you charge.
We won't make you drive it. We'll just give you 20 grand to drive one.
Exactly.
It's fine. Good luck.
But you know, Mark and I want to have these conversations not because they're contentious, not because there's emotion, and there's plenty of emotion around it. And you know, as a non-US citizen, probably my biggest concern about this election is the propensity to further divide the nation. There's nothing, you know, America is, you know, an ally of ours. We have strong and long-standing relationships with the USA as Australians, and it would be bloody awful to see, you know, that country, our friends, if you like, at war and at each other's throats. I mean, that was certainly a concern for many in Australia that I spoke to, that we would hate to see that outcome happen to, you know, a brother or sister of ours in the global context. What I will say is that it is encouraging, and I'm not particularly a fan of any politician, but, you know, I think some of the things that Trump's been able to get away with, on one hand, are masterful, on the other hand, deeply concerning. But, you know, it's at the same time, if he is a point of fusion for the American society, or for, you know, the society of the United States, well, then more power to him. And that if he brings people together, great. I don't believe in half the things he says. I find them overtly racist. I find, you know, like yada yada yada, right? But, you know, and in fact, you'd have to say that if the average Republican Party around the world got a slice of you know, consciousness, or a slice of, you know, compassion, that they would never lose an election again. So, you know, it's really, you know, on the other side of politics, the world over, the other side of politics is struggling holding that pattern and not being good for the economy, right?
But Scott, you know, when you're in the US, you know, Americans sort of like, you know, in the US, Americans like Australians and vice versa. You know, it's you know, they're sort of like us until you have a conversation. Then about half an hour, they look at you like you're from Sweden. You know, oh no, the government. No, you don't have to about the government. No, we have a universal welfare system. You know, like we.
Oh, great! You all got IKEA down there.
You know, like, what do you do? You get sick, you just go to hospital. Well, how much you pay? Well, nothing really. You know? I'm just sort of, what? You know, what sort of weird socialist world have you come from? And, you know, we've got to remember, you know, I mean, you know, America was founded on this sense of freedom and escaping persecution and all the rest. Australia was founded as a convict settlement, you know, and the
slightly different
mindsets, you know, hundreds of years in haven't quite, you know, we just look alike, you know. And we like each other, but there are differences, and, you know, I think we like the similar things, but and that's, you know, we have a natural rapport, but yeah, they think we're from Sweden after a while, but and we have a different system because we've inherited more of the. I mean, they had a
European system
with the British. We sort of still maintain one as our head of state, effectively, you know. So, you know, that we have those differences. But I think you're absolutely right on the point that, you know, and I always get back to the really about this, you know, if you're marketing something, the language you're going to use, how you're going to keep, you know, if you're a purpose-driven leader, you're the CEO of a company and all the rest, you know, you would have to see this as a somewhat, right, watch this space.
Yes.
What you know, what are the drivers now because it's changed. It wasn't just another election.
And I think that's the
something that said something. We can't do more of the same. And now there is a green light for change, and we're not 100% sure how that will play out. So, if you're running a company, you're leading a brand, you're trying to work out your communication around products and services and so on. How do you frame this? Where do you see your purpose in this new thing? Are you going to stick with the old purposes, if you like, and the globalization one or the local?
That's right. I mean, and the only difference between
the
only difference between successful shifts and unsuccessful shifts is the common belief. Like we've in the last 2 Australian referendums that we've had, one to become a Republican and one about the right, the voice to Parliament vote for Indigenous Australians. Not only was the answer no, but geographically the answer was consistent. Referendum to referendum, 25 years apart, something like that. So what does it say? It says, do I vote for change or no change? And that you have to hypothesize from that the meaning, back to your point about what Trump was saying versus what he was meaning, was not strong enough for people to desire something different in either case, right? So I think that's where he's nailed it. And what Mark and I would like to put forward from it is not really the political rhetoric. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning of it. But what is important for all of us to consider is that when you actually are trying to market something, trying to talk to people, trying to enhance your customer service, loyalty, whatever the case may be, you have to actually understand what's going on. You must truly understand what's going on, even if it's at odds with what you believe or what you think. And often it is, ladies and gentlemen. Often if you're sitting in a marketing or comms role, you may not be having the similar life experience to the customer that you're talking to. In most cases, you are not. So the market is indeed not you, never has been, or hardly ever is. But more to the point, what is the core belief system of the people that we're trying to talk to? And I think the US election, rather, is a magnificent case study in wake the fuck up. What is on people's minds? What are they concerned with? And, stop talking about superfluous shit that doesn't impact me. I want to know what impacts me.
Yeah.
And
I think that's where we're at. We know that more of the same isn't good enough. The question is, what is now good enough? What is the driver? What is going to make the next batch of successful companies and successful brands and successful leaders?
I mean, if and I'll go back to the point, if we're serious about the role of politics and the influence of these leaders, and we do not want external influence from the commercial sector, from industry, from government, not from government, from industry, from the business sector, which government is almost always criticised for taking influence from, in Australia, in the US, whatever, then might we just appoint the person we think is most apt for the job? I mean, if the smartest guy, and I'm not saying he is, but if the smartest guy in the US is Elon Musk, why doesn't he have the gig? Because following in the footsteps of who you put in the chair, Hulk Hogan's next on my damn show. I think Trump gets convicted and gets re-elected. Why not Hulk Hogan? Hell, Tyson's available. He didn't get that hurt on the weekend, so maybe he's good to go.
Well, Scott, are you going to be beefing up for an Australian election, mate? Are you going to be sort of whacking on a lot of muscle and ready to go on the new theory of beefcakes win the day? But look,
I think so. I think I'm on a solid diet of 68 eggs a day, Mark, just to sort of and chickens, live chickens. Actually, I don't have time to.
No. But I can recall I did a talk once, after the 2016 in a university here, which I never really got invited back to give this talk again because the 10 reasons Trump won. 10 reasons Trump won, and of course no one wanted to hear this because I was an aberration. He stole it. He didn't have the popular, all this stuff. Well, hello. And one of the points to this is I showed this video of him, in this American wrestling thing. It's not real, by the way; it's fake. I was trying to fool you. So whatever wrestling, with Hulk Hogan or whatever. And there's this bizarre thing. Trump's in the audience. It was an old thing I found on the internet, but he had this rapport. Like, he got up there, and there's all these people who go to professional wrestling events. And I know you mentioned Harvard and Yale before, Scott. I don't think that was the alumni. It was a different type of American.
Group of guys. Yeah.
Okay. And
did Mr. T go to? No, I'm just checking.
But at one point, Jesse the Body Ventura interviewed Donald Trump. Of course, Jesse the Body Ventura
naturally
Jesse the Mind Ventura, and actually won, I think, a gubernatorial campaign. And my Americans will correct me. I think Missouri was it? He with one of the best ever ads I've ever seen, which was Redan's The Thinker with a rotating camera, with him winking at the end. I think it won every award, for political campaigning. But he reinvented himself. Had the highest ever enrollment to vote of white males under 25. Not quite normally the target audience. Right. But and Trump was Andy. I'm just watching this thinking, he ended up elected. Trump ended up elected, and no one else. This was not an area. Kamala Harris would not be comfortable in that auditorium, but also because most of the women seemed to be wearing bikinis on, wrestling. So I'm not sure the thing. I'd endorse.
It's warm in those southern states, Mark. It's very warm.
Yeah. Very warm. I was watching, this thinking because I wanted to get some footage of Trump, and so years later, this is, these they all, I don't know what percentage, but you have to be 70, 80 primary vote, for Trump. He was there 20 years before. He put in these groundwork. I don't know whether he enjoys it or was part of a campaign or what, but he was there. He was doing it. He was out there relating, talking, being there. Of course, he wore a suit and all the rest. Like, he's not one of us, but he's a billionaire. He's not one of us, but he's here. He turned up.
He's amongst us, right?
Said all the funny. He has a. He can be quite funny. He says some funny things, and seems all right. I mean, he'd already won. He'd won him over 20 years ago. I mean, so I know you might have left your run late, Scott, but
Yeah, I might have.
But I use that as an example of, you just don't turn up on the day and say, "Hi, I'm here now. I've come to save you." You know who I am. I mean, that's not going to work. And I think this was, whether it was a carefully constructed campaign or fortuitous, I don't know. But that was something that we just don't have that here in Australia. We just don't have that sort of vaudevillian sort of event stuff as much. We have some of it, but not quite like they do there. And
let's be frank, in this part of the world, the dominance and arrogance of our forefathers in the UK, and the greatest thing about UK and Australian relationships, there was a linchpin mark. I think they called it Gallipoli, where they put the Australians on the beach first to get mowed down. That was a great showing of brotherhood from our friends in the UK. But I think Australians, and perhaps New Zealanders, if you look at the Olympics and look at where Australia and New Zealand rank and look at our populations, almost everybody else in the world, maybe not China, but almost everyone else in the world should be embarrassed, because here are these tiny little nations punching above their weight. That's necessary to an Australian belief. We must prove to you that we're just as good as you are. And that comes from a systemic, intergenerational, your shit beneath our faith, you're one of our colonies, right? So, you're right, it wouldn't work here because, we don't go for that grandiosity. And we like to punch above our weight. And it's a very different thing for us.
Yeah.
So,
with the Olympics, it's how much money you can put in to fund sports. So, you'd always fund the US will ultimately.
I've got to say, Mark, we might overinvest per capita versus other countries.
Oh, yeah.
But literally the only place on the planet you can actually make a living being an Olympic athlete.
Australia, if you look at it, Australia and the US are two of the top 4 wealthy countries per person. right? When you actually work individual wealth, right? Two of the top four countries for wealth of individuals are US and Australia. Now, earned in very different ways, I might add.
Reveal on the other two.
One's Luxembourg, I think, because it's only
Pretty big on the global radar. Luxembourg, yeah.
I don't know.
I remember them coming out with the flag. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. But I never saw them doing well at the Olympics either, Luxembourg.
No.
Not sure who the other one is.
A bit of mascot.
But when you actually look at the disparity, Australia is far more homogenous, whereas US has these huge extremes of billionaires. What's it? Globalization, huge winners of globalization.
Massively, yeah.
And so, but Australia has that more even thing. So it's sort of insulated a bit against that, fight. And that sort of, it's about them and, I don't know, it's not that bad. Yeah, we got problems. Yeah, we do have problems. We have incredible wealth issues and distributions. And I think we're just in lag, I think, maybe 10, 15 years to the US.
Yeah, that's right.
And, so we looked at the US, what's it going to look like in 10 years' time? But we also don't have that entrepreneurialism to sort of help drive it out. If we didn't have resources, we would be stuck. We don't have that. We don't have that innovation, and that transformation.
Yeah, the conservatism of our forefathers, unfortunately, lives in the veins of Australian business people, and that's.
So I think that's where I think ultimately we sort of sitting is we can compete because we have that sort of wealth, and you can sort of tap into that money because it isn't too disadvantageous into it. But when you are struggling and you are seeing waste, and you have counted every penny to put food on the table, and you see government waste or the anger that would drive in you because of the inherent unfairness about that, would be profound. And I think there's somehow or other, just to sort of, I suppose, my sort of comment, Trump found that, turned that anger, fight, into hope, which is actually extraordinary communication thing. I've not seen it in politics in my lifetime.
No, that's right.
It's still to be, understood in full. So I personally, I don't particularly like the guy sort of thing, but
I think it gets rise, Mark, and I'm just thinking about next episode.
The achievement of it is extraordinary, and
it is indeed.
I hope those people that that are in those towns that have been struck, that they directly lost their livelihoods as a result of mass globalization and the destruction of local. I hope something great happens for them, and I hope he can deliver. I don't care who delivers it. I hope someone does something to help those people. I think it would be fantastic, and that would be a great model for us as well. If the Americans can pull it off, and I put more money on them than us. If they can pull off something like that to regenerate and to provide hope and to provide a sense of purpose and place in society that was often given through the Industrial Revolution, ironically through the Industrial Revolution, considering its origins, if that can happen, that's fantastic. And
I think, Mark, potentially a knock on from here for us to discuss in the next round, and I think it's worthy for us to maybe rinse and repeat on the topic, not the same discussion obviously, but the same topic. We really do need to, as communicators and as marketers, and even as politicians, tap into the popular belief. And when we play the edges of society and we want to label people and we want to there's an awful lot of instruments of segregation from the woke. And they are instruments of segregation, whether you bloody like it or not. That's what they do. In a society where isolation, loneliness, and disconnection are some of the greatest impacts and impositions on our mental health, our happiness as a society and the world over, right? But we continue to have these. I was going to say leftist, but that's not. I don't have a political bone in my body. But we have these views that seek to differentiate and segregate and. I cringe every time I hear, and I realize it's in the States, but, the black folk, the what? For me, but we do continue to create language and discussion around things that do, in fact, keep us apart and don't bring us together. And, you know, as a leader of a business, of a brand, of a country, your job is to bring the collective together around a common goal. And I think that, by and large, was achieved more by Trump than it was by Harris, and far more by Trump, it's fair to say. And I think the takeaway from this, which is why Mark and I were keen to talk about it, is that we have to get to the nub of belief in the greater population, not the and there is an absolutely noisy minority out there that take up all the airtime and fuck all of the population. And as we're trying to market products and services and so forth, we have to become attuned to what the vast majority of people believe in. And that's the takeaway from the election.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts, Mark?
Oh no, I think that's it. I mean, I just think we got to take, you've got to look to the positives, recognize what's happened, and work out how you can position, your organization, yourself, the brand, whatever it's going to be in this environment. And someone's rung the bell. The bell rang. Something new now. That's finished. This is what's going to be the most interesting thing is to find out what that new is, and how it works, and what the language will be. Because virtually my whole life, I've been living in this paradigm with this particular language and framework, and that's almost defined Reagan, Thatcher, free market, blah blah blah. Like, if you stood up there, in the 1980s and said, I oppose the free market because it'll have this, people they may actually lock you up. That you had gone,
Yes.
Because it's so unpalatable to suggest that it didn't work, because it did work for a period of time, and then it didn't. So, and we have had in some respect that period was relative stability, given the fact that we had used seismic sort of issues with communism, socialism, capitalism, and wars through Latin America, Asia. So I mean these things. I mean, people almost conveniently forget just how much tension, division, and loss of life occurred around these key things. So we stand at the threshold. We peer the future.
Exactly. Well, good opportunity for me to thank everyone for listening in, or who's listening to the recording of this. Mark and I will stick our heads up in a few weeks' time. We tend to keep at that sort of cadence, and look forward to having this discussion again. Apologies to anyone about LinkedIn letting us down on the connection. We did get it there eventually, but obviously, if you're watching the recording, you'll be completely unaware of this. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and thank you, Mark, for your time. Always love our discussions, whether in front of others or not.
You, Scott. Congratulations on the EV.
On the what? Sorry, on the EV. Yes. No, it's great. I just can't find the plug.
Great idea.
Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next time. Cheers.
Sweet transistor from the land of Trumpsylvania. How do you do? I see you've met my faithful MAGA man. He's just a little brought down, cause when you knock, he thought you were the tax man.